Hello, my name is Michael Valera.
And my name is Isa Chong. We have had the unique opportunity to sit down with both the Philippine ambassador to China and the Chinese ambassador to the Philippines, His Excellency Chito Santa Romana and His Excellency Huang Xilian, respectively.
They will provide their respective insights and updates on recent issues, ranging from the COVID-19 vaccine development, intergovernmental cooperation projects and trade, as well as the future of Sino-Philippine relations.
Good afternoon, Ambassador. So,
Good
first and
afternoon.
foremost, thank you for taking the time to join us today. And before anything else, we'd like to ask, how have you been,
Thank you,
Ambassador?
Isa, and thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me
Things have been
here today.
okay. I mean,
And I'm
you know,
fine.
here
Thank
in
you so much.
Beijing, the situation has improved a lot.
Wow.
So I'm fine. I'm fine. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. It's our pleasure to meet you today. And we're going to get right to the questions now, as we are very familiar with both China and the Philippines government have made it clear that strengthening and fostering a positive relationship between the two countries is one of its primary goals. Now, one of the many ways that may be achieved is through trade relations. And so we would like to ask, what is the current status of trade between the two countries as affected by the pandemic?
Well, when the outbreak happened and the pandemic spread, it disrupted the trade ties too between the two countries.
Yes.
So particularly in the first quarter, also there was a drop in our exports, but things have picked up in the second quarter, and things are working out well now. If you go around Beijing, now there's a big demand for Philippine bananas and Philippine fruits because of the demand for healthy food. However, of course, the good thing though is that aside from bananas, there's a big demand also for pineapples, and now the Chinese authorities have permitted the import into China of young coconut, and as well as avocado. So
Wow.
these are the new fruits that are being allowed, and there's a big demand here. For bananas now, we basically supply half to 60% of the banana supply to China right now is coming from the Philippines. So that's proceeding well. So China actually in the first half of this year has become the top source of our exports. And of course, as in the past years, it remains as our top import source. We still continue to import a lot of machinery, a lot of fuel oil, and so on. But the other thing that's happened is that in terms of exports, the other exports have picked up during the past quarter and during the current quarter. So despite the disruption in the early part of the year, things are picking up now, and hopefully we'll be able to equal, if not surpass, the trade performance last year.
Yes, Philippines is a major trading partner of China, and China has been the largest trading partner of the Philippines. And of course, our trade has been to some extent disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. But having said that, I'm glad to see that China still, remain to be the largest trading partner for the Philippines. And now we are still importing a lot of bananas, coconuts, and agricultural products, and some other, produce and agricultural produce and industrial products from the Philippines to China. And people love the fruits from your country. And of course, we need to overcome a lot of difficulties in maintaining such a momentum of trade between our two countries. And now we are making every effort to contribute to the economic recovery of our two countries.
Yes.
Since that both of our countries have faced a severe challenge from the COVID-19 pandemic which have, that's not only severely impacted the lives and health of the people, but also the economic and social development. And now we are taking a lot of measures to overcome the difficulties caused by the pandemic. And one of the very major measures is that we are negotiating a fast lane arrangement between our two countries. We have already submitted and the kind of draft to your government for your consideration, and we are negotiating on that text. We hope that we can conclude it in the near future so that it will contribute to the trade and economic cooperation between our two countries and contribute to the economic recovery of our two countries. Apart from that kind of fast lanes arrangement, we are also, doing our best to provide, we call it a green corridor for logistics between our two countries. That because of the pandemic, the logistic of trade have been impacted. So we are doing every effort to provide such a green corridor for the traders of our two countries. And as for China, we have a lot of projects in your country.
Yes.
And we are making every effort to restart those or recover those projects so that they will contribute to your economic restart or recovery in this country, and to also contribute to the livelihood in the country. And I'm happy to see that most of the projects are being recovered at about 80 to 90% of their production capacities. And those projects, after being revitalized, will add dynamics to your economic development in this country.
Thank you for sharing that, Ambassador. And we definitely look forward to those projects. Ambassador Huang, we would also like to ask that in addition to intergovernmental cooperation projects and trade, what other measures does China have to stimulate economic and trade exchanges between the two countries? Because currently the Philippines is implementing the second phase of the economic stimulus plan, or bayanihan, to assist the development of small, medium, and micro enterprises and provide more employment opportunities. So we would like to ask, what role can China play in this, Ambassador?
Yes, I think that we have, as I mentioned, that's a couple of the G2G projects.
Yes.
And we start off those projects, and recovery of the production capacity of those projects will contribute to your economic recovery as a whole. And apart from that, private investments and also is a very important part of our economic cooperation. And according to the Chinese statistics, in the first half of this year, the total value of China's newly signed contracts of contracted projects for the Philippines increased by 26.5% year on year to $3.7 billion US. And the turnover of the contracted projects amounted to $1.2 billion US. And apart from those G2G projects, I think that's small and medium enterprises are also playing a very important role in our relationship. And as I mentioned, that's we have to help them, including those importers in China of bananas and coconuts from the country. We have worked out a lot of measures in China to encourage, to help those small and medium enterprises, including in terms of importing agricultural produce from overseas. So we believe those measures will also help those small and medium enterprises in the trade between our two countries. And as emphasized by your presidential spokesperson, Mr. Roque, just in the past few days, that's the synergy between the Belt and Roads Initiative and the Build plan. Mm-hmm. It's very important to both of our two sides, and it is one of the key contributors to your economic development. And we are working to overcome some difficulties we are facing now in this process. Say, those projects in your country, they are facing the shortage of managerial and engineering staff from China because of the temporary travel ban from the country. And we hope that we can work out something to allow the entry of Chinese engineering staff and management staff to come to, revitalize to full extent those projects.
That is very reassuring to hear. With that said, how should the two governments continue momentum and promote the recovery and development of the economic and trade relations between the two countries in the post-pandemic era?
Well, their current problems now, current challenges that we're trying to solve. One is, particularly as we strive for, recovery in the post-COVID period, is to make sure that the cargo continues to flow smoothly. Mm-hmm. And that's why there are discussions right now, consultations and negotiations on what we call the express lane or a green channel for cargo. In addition, we're talking about a fast lane for personnel, because one of the problems we had is that virtually, there were each country, both the Philippines and China, basically the visa window was closed in each country. And all the existing visas were suspended. And virtually tourism stood still. I don't think we can restore tourism right away. That will take time. Even in China, a survey, I attended a webinar the other day by the Department of Tourism, and they had a Chinese expert who explained the trends in the Chinese market. The Chinese tourists have been going out now, because now that the virus here is under control, but they're staying inside the country. They're going to the different tourist sites within China, but they're still not ready to venture outside. I think the only exception being considered right now is really some countries in Europe, but in Southeast Asia, Thailand may be one of the first. We're on the second tier, and we're looking forward to that, particularly as we start the last quarter and particularly for next year. So tourism will have to wait. In the meantime, what we want to restore is at least the personnel exchanges, government officials, because one of the disruption has been on face-to-face diplomacy. Even in Beijing, it's only now that we're seeing each other again with Chinese officials. It used to be by phone, and a lot of it was meetings were done virtually, internationally. I mean, when the two presidents called Avishada, it was by telephone, and when the foreign secretary and the Chinese foreign minister had a meeting, it was again through virtual meeting. So that's what we want to do. One is to make sure that cargo can flow without interruption. This would help a lot in terms of boosting trade, and then to gradually restore personnel exchanges, starting with officials, with businessmen and engineers. Oh, I just had a meeting actually this week. A number of the Chinese engineers, managers for the different priority projects that are being done with Chinese aid in the Philippines, like the Kaliwa Dam.
Mhm.
I had a meeting with China Energy, and that was one of the things they wanted. They had over 100 personnel, engineers and managers who have been stranded or stuck here in China because of the situation. Because one of the problems right now, also aside from that we're not giving out visas, is that there is a lack of flights. Flights have virtually stopped between the two countries. It's only selected flights that have been allowed. And even in Beijing, if you want to fly in Beijing, there's no way. You have to go to another city in China, do the
Mhm.
quarantine there, do the protocols before they allow you to Beijing. It's part of the way of controlling the epidemic and protecting the capital. Uh, and vice versa, because there are no flights and there are no visas, so they can't go to the Philippines. So that we're trying to restore that now gradually. This is all part of the post-recovery plan.
Understood. Thank you, Ambassador. Now, also, before we discuss further the fast lane personnel arrangement, we also wanted to know that since China is the world's second largest economy, how should the Philippine government and enterprises, do you think, use and develop such an important market?
Well, China is not only the second biggest economy, it's actually one of the biggest consumer market. It's certainly the world's fastest growing consumer
Mm-hmm.
market. So we cannot afford not to be in the China market. They bought last year almost $600 million worth of bananas alone. Okay, and this year we expect to equal that, if not to surpass that, and with other exports. So definitely, uh, it is something that our businessmen, our exporters, our producers should take into consideration. And China actually, after having a decline in its economic growth in the first quarter, recovered in the second quarter, and now is surging forward. It may be among the major, maybe the only major economy that will have a positive growth for this year, and it continues to grow. So because of that, we have to, in a sense, partake of this growth. And the only way to do that is to be able to channel our efforts towards further developing the Chinese market. Hopefully, we can go beyond, you know, agricultural products, tropical
Mm-hmm.
fruits, and go into more value added because there is a big demand here for that. In addition, as a matter of fact, they're going to have an international conference on to promote investments in different countries. This is going to happen in early September in Xiamen. It's an international promotion. And because of the situation where, because of the travel restrictions, nobody can from the Philippines can come over. I've been delegated to lead the Philippine delegation there, and I'll attend and meet with different Chinese representatives, and together with our commercial counselor and the Xiamen consulate, as well as the agricultural counselor from the Department of Agriculture, we will try to promote the Philippines as an investment destination. So both in terms of selling our products, attracting investment, because China now is the second biggest source of our approved investment for the past year, and we want to maintain that. And there are actually Chinese that have been inquiring about, before the virus outbreak happened, there were a couple of investment delegations scheduled already to go to the Philippines. Some were on advanced stage of feasibility study. All of that has been affected. So the challenge now is how to put that back on track.
Yeah.
And that is an important challenge that we're trying to accomplish.
On the topic of personnel exchanges, it is clear that since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the economic and trade exchanges, as well as personnel exchanges between the two countries have been affected to a certain extent. It is reported that China and Indonesia have formally launched a fast lane personnel arrangement a few days ago to facilitate personnel exchanges for the purposes of ensuring epidemic and pandemic prevention. maintaining the smooth flow of industrial and supply chains, as well as helping each other's economic recovery. Is there also a similar plan between China and the Philippines? And if so, when will it be completed?
Yes, I think that is very important to ensure the normal exchanges of personnel who are engaged in the major projects between our two countries. And we have already accumulated some experience in dealing with some countries, say Singapore and Republic of Korea. We had begun that kind of the arrangement with these two countries a few months ago. And it has been proven that that kind of practice of fast lane works so well. So recently we just concluded another arrangement with the Indonesian government for fast lane arrangement. And we are working very hard with my counterparts in the Department of External Affairs and some other ministries, some other departments, to make sure that we will work out such a great arrangement at an early date, so that all the kind of necessary, crucial personnel for trade and economic cooperation will be allowed for entry to the countries of both sides.
Thank you for that, Ambassador Huang. Now, we've been talking about the Chinese projects here in the Philippines. We would like to ask about the current progress of these Chinese projects, and if there are any, what difficulties are these projects facing, and how does the embassy plan to solve these difficulties?
Yes, yes, we have quite some G2G projects in the Philippines. Some of them are very crucial to your build plan. And in the past few weeks, I have visited either on site or online some of the projects to see how they are doing in the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that they are making progress quite well. As I said, that they have already restored their production capacity to about 80 to 90%. They are, revitalizing those projects. And most of the local employees are back to work already. And I think that's very important. If you go to see the bridge across the Pasig River, you will see that it's working quite well. Its workers are working around the clock on that project. And of course, at the same time, they are also facing some difficulties. Being that, that's a permanent difficulty is that how to strike balance between the resumption of work and the prevention and COVID control. So they have to keep the balance. And of course, they have a lot of experience as we have accumulated in China since we started our economy earlier than your country. So we have paid cost to accumulate those experiences, and those experiences now apply in the country. And it seems those experiences are working quite well. Second is, as I said, that those projects, are facing the shortage of personnel from China. So that's why we are working very hard on that kind of fast lane arrangement, so that we can bring in those engineering staff and management staff from China to, restore those projects to a full swing.
Yes, this is one of the topics that the two presidents discussed almost a couple of months back, actually. And the Chinese have a proposal that they submitted. It's along the same lines as Indonesia. It's also something they have with Singapore and something that they have with South Korea. And so there is a draft that has been submitted. The two Foreign Secretary Locsin and State Councilor Huang also discussed that during their virtual meeting last June. So it is it's now being studied by DFA and the Office of the President, and we hope we can come to an agreement soon, so that we could have a similar arrangement, the fast lane. And actually, the original plan was to have it by this month, if as much as possible. But actually, I think the ball is on our side in Manila, and part of it is that it's now we're back to GCQ. I think people are back now and to their offices, so it's easier to be able to process these materials, and hopefully we can sign a similar agreement in the next week or next month, or the next month or so. So the prospect for that is quite good.
That's something that we're going to look forward to, Ambassador, but also since we mentioned earlier that the pandemic has really affected a lot aside from just trade, we would love to know what is the situation for fellow Filipinos in China currently?
Right now, actually, the Filipinos here, health-wise, have come out pretty good. There's been a handful of Filipinos that were infected, but most of the cases here of Filipinos that were infected, they actually were not local transmission. There was one case, he came back. He works here, then he went back to the Philippines for Chinese New Year, and then he got stranded there, and then he came back. And when he landed and the Chinese tested him, unfortunately he tested positive, but he was put in a hospital. His company took care of him, of his expenses, and he's back at work now. Aside from him, there were a couple of others, mostly seafarers. They were not local Filipinos, they were not Filipinos staying here or living and working here. Their ships were docking in China. And then when they tested positive, so they had to be brought to the hospital and to be quarantined. But they're either in stable condition, have already recovered, and have gone. So on the whole, in terms of health, the Filipino community here has done pretty well, given what China has gone through. Also because we have issued advisories, and the Chinese government have also issued advisories on what to do. The whole quarantine, the whole protocol was followed. But beyond that, though, most of the problems encountered by the overseas Filipinos here, really had to do with the stoppage in the work. When schools stopped meeting, when the schools were suspended, because quite a significant portion of the Filipinos are teachers. They suffered either lower pay or no work, no pay, or the schools were suspended for a while, and they had to wait till the schools were resumed. Now that the situation in China is much better, they're back to work. So there's less of the complaints about that. At one point, the different consulates around China, I think we distributed between 500 to 1,000 food packages to different Filipinos who were in distress and who were in need, using the Philippine government's what is called fund for helping overseas Filipino workers. In addition to that, of course, there were cases of Filipinos who lost their jobs, because they worked in small schools or small hotels or small bars, and these businesses folded up, and so they didn't have jobs. So there were cases of Filipinos, and I'm very glad to report that during the past 2 weeks, quite a number of them, at least from Beijing and other consulates in southern China, in Guangzhou, in Xiamen, about more than 100 were able to go back on a special PAL flight, Philippine Airlines flight. There's a couple more hundred or more in Shanghai waiting to go home because they don't have jobs anymore and they want to go back. Other than that, most of the Filipinos that are remaining here have resumed their work, and they have challenges here and there But overall, they have been able to survive and to cope well the whole pandemic.
Diving in deeper onto the pandemic and its effects, it is reported that China has promised to give priority to the Philippines after the vaccine is successfully developed. Could you please tell us the latest progress in vaccine development? And since the outbreak, what cooperation and mutual assistance activities have the two countries undertaken in the fight against the pandemic?
Yes, vaccine is very important for every country to tide over the challenge of COVID-19 pandemic. And as now, since the beginning of this year, China has invested greatly in vaccine research and development. I think that we have developed vaccines in all different technology lines. That means we have quite a lot of vaccine developers, and we will make sure that some of those developers will be successful in putting those vaccines into application someday in the near future. And at the moment, out of the 8 vaccines, we call it candidate vaccines, which have entered the 3rd phase clinical trial around the globe, 4 of them are Chinese developers. And they have not only conducted clinical trial in China, but they are also conducting clinical trial of the 3rd phase in other countries. Say that one of the vaccine developers is doing the 3rd phase clinical trial in UAE. That is Sinopharm. And it has already conducted the clinical trial for 30,000 people in UAE. Among them, 1,800 people are Filipinos. And this kind of the 3rd phase clinical trial began as early as sometime in June. That means it has been conducted for more than 2 months already. And so we are expecting the Chinese developers to complete those 3rd clinical trials at an early date, so that those vaccines will be used to save lives, not only in China, but also around the globe. And during the telephone conversation between our 2 presidents, Chinese President Xi Jinping has assured your president that China will consider the Philippines as the priority when we have developed successfully our vaccines. So we are working very closely with the Philippine counterparts to make sure that we will be able to honor the commitments of our presidents and to implement the consensus reached by our 2 presidents. And I'm happy to see that a few vaccine developers are engaging their counterparts in your country quite closely. And they are pressing ahead their cooperation in vaccine development and vaccine application. So we look forward an early application of the vaccines in this country, and we hope that it will contribute to the safety of lives of the people in this country and also the economic recovery in this country.
Well, this is actually one area of cooperation now between the 2 countries. You see, this is for every, as the saying goes, for every negative development, there's a positive that one can see. You know, when COVID hit, the outbreak happened, it disrupted our bilateral relations to a significant degree. But it also opened a new channel. And one of this is in cooperation in terms of combating the pandemic, particularly with vaccine. This is actually a special topic that President Duterte raised with President Xi when they had their conversation, their phone conversation. And President Xi has reiterated, has actually agreed to consider the Philippines when the vaccine is developed. Now, China now has at least 3 different vaccines that are in the phase 3 stage. It's like the final stage. Yes. Before it goes into commercial production. And China has had cooperation with Brazil, and even with UAE in the Middle East, and recently also an agreement with Indonesia and the Philippines. The lead agency for this is the Department of Science and Technology, and we are facilitating their communication, DOST, and the Chinese company. One is how the Philippines can be part of the phase 3, the trial. Of course, there will be a sample selected in the Philippines. Yes. And China will be using the Chinese vaccine. So this is one part of the cooperation. And of course, if everything works out and everything succeeds, later on, it's how to get the vaccines to the Philippines. China, of course, they're already in a very advanced stage. Last June, they already approved a certain vaccine for the final phase 3, and it's already been approved for the military. So they have, in a sense, used the vaccine already on their military. And then just last month, in July, they have approved, again, the use of this experimental vaccine on what they call the frontliners, including the customs inspections for the imported products. So they're already quite advanced in that respect. Now they're also doing it, but because they've been able to handle the epidemic quite well here, and what they've done is that they wanted to try it on areas where the epidemic is still raging, and that's why they chose Brazil, Indonesia, UAE, and the Philippines, because it would test it not only on Chinese patients but also on different ethnic patients of different ethnicities, and to see if there are any variations in the result. So I think the outlook for cooperation here, one, it's already happening. Discussions are continuing as we speak, and we hope there will be, they're trying to finalize the arrangements. So the Philippines will certainly partake in some of the phase 3 trial, and then when all of that is done, in the commercial production and particularly the use of the vaccine in the Philippines after that.
We're very, very hopeful, Ambassador, for the vaccine. And we're looking forward to Filipinos being able to participate in the phase 3 trial. And also, you mentioned earlier, Ambassador, na there are still Filipinos who are there, still looking to come home. So we're really hopeful also that they get to come home and reunite with their families. But aside from that, we would also like to know, can you tell us more about China's current anti-epidemic work and the resumption of work and production? And what do you think can the Philippines learn from China's experience?
Well, I think China benefited from being the first one where the outbreak first was reported and where it first happened. Particularly, it had experience of dealing with the epidemic in Wuhan. Basically, they derived some good lessons there. In the case of Wuhan, they encountered the same problems everybody's encountering. They were losing their frontliners. They didn't have enough hospital beds. There were long lines in front of hospitals. So what did they do? Again, this is the paradox in the Chinese system. When the central government focuses its attention, the centralized command, they mobilized the resources. They built, you know, hospitals, 2 extra hospitals. They sent in a whole battalion of military doctors, you know, by plane to supplement. And then they flew in doctors from all over the country. Of course, in the case of China, they have certain resources that are difficult to match. But the other lesson in Wuhan was that the use of both of, you know, tracing, the use of lockdown, the use of separation, the infection, the isolation. So based on the Wuhan experience, they were able to put it under control. And then when after a month it happened again, they learned from that experience. They applied the same strategy, but in a more targeted way. And they resulted to mass testing of the whole city just to make sure, because they were having problems with what they call asymptomatic. In the case of after that, then they had the Beijing cluster, the cluster in Beijing from a wholesale market. After Beijing had already been clear of infection for almost 2 months. And then suddenly there was this cluster. So here they applied what you would call a finer version of the Wuhan strategy. Instead of locking down the whole city, they just locked down the market and then the surrounding areas. And then they traced all the people who had been to the market for the past 2 weeks before that and found where they were living. And then they locked down those neighborhoods. And so it was very targeted, a use of extensive tracing. And then they had this hospital in Beijing, which was not being used. It was built for SARS. And after SARS, it was no longer being used. They reopened this. And again, all the, you know, the infected people, patients were put there. And they were able to put it under control. They also did mass testing on half of the population of Beijing. Basically those areas where there were people who were either infected or were close contacts of those infected. So there are a number of lessons there, but the key is really, you have to start from the very beginning. You know, it's like a combination of the mass surveillance, you know, knowing who are the ones who are carriers of the virus. And once a cluster happens, it's to pounce on it and make sure it's limited. And at that point, you know, Beijingers could not travel to other parts of China because nobody would accept it because of what was happening in Beijing. So there was an incentive to really control it. After that, Beijing got it done. And then the cluster, there was a cluster in Urumqi, in Xinjiang. Again, they put the same methods there. And here again, the whole city virtually was tested and they were able to isolate the ones who were infected. And now it's under control there. So basically in the country right now, in terms of local community transmission, it's almost been a period of time. Well, certainly at least the past week, they've reported 0. Before that, it was single digits or low double digits. Now it's 0 for almost more than a week. And in Beijing, it's almost 2 weeks now that we've had 0 infection. The only case now of infection is coming from abroad. Chinese, overseas Chinese who want to return. You know, that's why they require swab testing at the airports and to be able to get the ones who are infected out there. So there are a lot of good lessons here that we could learn from, but it really takes a lot of whole government effort, a lot of whole society effort. In China, they use a term which they use from the period of the revolution, from Mao, people's war. You know, everybody contributing, neighbors, neighborhoods, you know, watching who has fever. I mean, it's like a whole mass movement. But beyond that, again, it's separation of those who are suspected and those who are infected, and then how to preserve the frontliners, and basically how to develop the capability for mass testing. So there are a number of good lessons, which actually, when the Chinese medical team went to the Philippines, they shared these lessons. But you know, when you're hearing it as on a theoretical level, it's different than when you're encountering the real problem. Then you see, you know, where there were gaps in tracing or in the number of beds that have to be built, in isolation, and in how to be able to have an effective lockdown. In China at that point, they basically didn't allow them on. There was only one member of each family who could go out for shopping. And in a sense, in the beginning, they had mobilized a lot of people to bring supplies and goods to the neighborhoods. You know, it was a massive effort. It's hard to match, but you see what is needed. It's like how to isolate the virus. But they got it done. They got it done. And so now people are back. The theaters are back here where people watch movies, you know, every other seat. It's not full house yet. It's at least half of the capacity. And restaurants, you know, they already had a big party in Wuhan on a swimming pool. They had a raid party. I mean, for a while I was saying, oh, we have another cluster here if they don't watch it. But so far, so good. And I think there is a sort of a pent-up emotion and pent-up feelings for people who've been under lockdown. So they travel all around. We're going to have this again with the Autumn Moon Festival and Chinese National Day. There's going to be a big surge of domestic tourism, not yet abroad, but at least within China, particularly to the inner parts of China. There is a lot of traveling. So the economy, because of that, is now surging. But there are challenges. They have a lot of challenges still in front of them.
It's great, Ambassador, that you put it as a people's war, because at the end of the day, all of us just really want, you know, to the greater good for everyone. And I think that every country can really learn a lot from each other. So thank you for sharing the lessons that you've taken that Philippines can also use here locally. Ambassador Huang, I would also like to ask, in response to the development of the pandemic, may we know if the embassy has other plans for the next phase to help the Philippines?
Yes, you know, that's since the outbreak of the COVID-19, we have been supporting each other between our two countries. At the early stage of China's, you know, that's difficulties in fighting the pandemic in China, we received very valuable support and assistance from the people and the government of the Philippines. We cherish that kind of support very much and will always hold it dear to our heart. And after the outbreak of the COVID-19 in the Philippines, to reciprocate your support to China, we are working very closely and working to the best of our capability to provide our assistance. So we have been, you know, providing medical supplies, either in terms of the government aid or in terms of facilitating your purchase of medical supplies in China. And we are also facilitating your country to send aircraft and ships to China to carry back those medical supplies. And we are also, you know, that's providing some kind of goodwill flights to help bring back those medical supplies to your country. And as you know, that we sent our expert medical team to your country. They stay here for 2 weeks to share experiences with you without any reservation. So that's, you don't need to pay the cost that we have already paid for in fighting the pandemic. And at the same time, we know that of course, we are also preparing to send more medical supplies here. In a couple of days, we are sending in some more, you know, that's equipments. We call it high flow oxygen therapy equipments to help those, you know, that's patients, those patients who are badly infected by the COVID-19. And we know that you also are facing difficulties in terms of livelihood of the people. especially those ordinary people. So we are also making some contribution, a donation to help those people in tide over the difficult times. And at the same time, we also work very closely with your country to restart and recover all those productions and, that's construction capability of those projects. It is also a way to contribute to your, that's efforts in fighting the COVID-19.
I think the entire country is grateful for the contribution that China has given the country. So it's really important to just work hand in hand, both countries, the Philippines and China. But right now, Ambassador Huang, I would like to go to another issue, which is the South China Sea. We would like to ask, how do you evaluate the current situation in the South China Sea? And it is reported that the foreign affairs ministries of China and the Philippines had a dispute over China's activities near Scarborough Shoal recently. Does this mean that the differences between the two countries on the South China Sea issue have deepened?
Yes, I think that's, we do have differences in the South China Sea. And as neighbors, it's very normal to have some differences since we are so close to each other. And what is crucial is that how to handle the differences. Out of the total relationship, the overall relationship between our two countries, it is important, but it is not all about our relationship. So we have to place it in a proper place in our bilateral relations. Some people try to hype up this issue, try to make it as the whole for our relationship. I think it is not correct to do so. We need to work together to manage the differences, and through the kind of the friendly negotiations and bilateral consultations. We have already established a couple of the mechanisms, including the bilateral consultation mechanisms, and some other mechanisms bilaterally to address the concerns of each other. And those mechanisms are working quite well. We have been exchanging views through those mechanisms to find common grounds. Mm-hmm. And of course, at regional level, we have the consultations on the code of conduct in the South China Sea. And it's another very important effort to address the issue, to stabilize the South China Sea. So as I said, it's very normal to have differences between neighbors, but we have to take the right approach in handling the differences by bilateral consultations and friendly negotiations.
Well, the differences are real, and they're there, they exist. But the point is to be able to put it in perspective, The differences the disputes do not define the relationship, and certainly do not constitute the sum total of the relationship between the two countries. When Foreign Secretary Locsin talked to Foreign Minister and State Councilor, ocean that's there, and there's some pebbles, small pebbles that constitute like the dispute, that sometimes we stumble in it. However, there's a whole area of cooperation, and this is the point we're trying to make. The difference is that we're able to talk about the differences right now, mm-hmm. and that there is a mechanism. There's a bilateral consultation mechanism. There is a foreign ministry talks between the two sides. There is the meeting between the two foreign secretaries, the two foreign ministers, and occasional summit meetings between the two presidents. So all of this, we're able to talk about the differences, because the key is we cannot solve these differences overnight. When you deal with issues of sovereignty and issues of sovereign rights, these are complicated issues. And because, we have different perspectives and different claims, the key is to be able to discuss it and to manage it so that it does not become a crisis, so that it does not become a shooting war. We agree with, as Winston Churchill would say, talk. More talking is better than fighting, or all of that. So we prefer to use diplomacy, diplomatic methods, peaceful methods, discussion, dialogue as the way to resolve the differences and to go beyond the differences. We speak of it like two tracks. We put into one track all the areas where we have no disputes, where we have no differences, and it's a wide track, and we can go fast on this track. And that's what we're doing with economic cooperation, trade, science, technology, vaccine, name it, COVID. And on the other track is the track where we discuss our challenges, our disputes. We do it every 6 months. We have this bilateral consultation mechanism where we have very frank discussions on these issues. And as we experience, there are areas we can manage and we can resolve one by one, and there are areas where we need more time, simply because they're complicated. So the South China Sea, where most of the differences are, we've been able at least to manage the situation in such a way that the number of incidents would decline, the number of confrontation, the number of challenges. I mean, there's still problems. It's not something we expect to disappear overnight, but at least we're able to handle it. We're able to manage it.
You mentioned going above the differences, and one of the ways that is being pursued is through the ongoing negotiations that is centered around the code of conduct between China and the other Southeast Asian countries, including the Philippines, involving the South China Sea. With that being said, what is the current progress of negotiation on the code of conduct? And do you think, considering the circumstances brought by the pandemic, can this code of conduct still be concluded as scheduled according to the original plan?
Well, the code of conduct is one of the areas that was affected by the COVID pandemic, basically because this was, there was already a working group for the code of conduct that was scheduled in early February, and as a result, when the virus outbreak happened, that was postponed, and then it became postponed indefinitely. So now the challenge is how to resume, what we call the technical working group, and then the senior officials meeting, and then the actual plenary meetings. Because the code of conduct, as you know, the original idea was to be able to finish it, if possible, by 2021, a 3-year plan, from 2018, 2019. And since the Philippines is the coordinator in ASEAN for ASEAN-China relations, we certainly had a stake in being able to push it forward. And most of all, because the code of conduct is an important process, as well as an important outcome that we're hoping for, to be able to, if not to resolve, to manage the controversial issues, the contentious issues in the South China Sea. It's to codify it. And it is significant because China is part of the process, and this is one of the problems we had with the arbitration. When the Philippines filed its case, China was not willing to accept it. Here in the Code of Conduct, China is part of the process. So it is an important attempt to be able to reach an agreement between ASEAN countries and China, where China has a stake and will be part of a process to which they will be held accountable for. And that's why it's very important to proceed. However, because of health considerations and because of the sensitivity of the Code of Conduct negotiations and the Code of Conduct talks, the ASEAN members felt, and the Chinese also felt, that it was important to do it face to face. And so we're waiting for the conditions that will allow again. They're now talking of how to combine it, both virtual and face to face, or at least limited meetings, to be able to resume at least, the working level talks. And we hope to be able to do it soon. And the goal was sometime in the next couple of months between now and the end of the year. So we could resume the process. Now, it may affect the schedule somewhat because, as you know, the whole process was to do 3 readings, you know. We completed the first reading of the Code of Conduct. The second reading was actually about to start. And so we have to do that. And then there will be a third reading. And it becomes more sensitive and more complicated as you go to the final one. Because the first part was the easy one. You first take out all the areas where you all agree on. Let's put that aside. That was the first reading. The second one was to try to deal with some of the differences. And so it was going to be more challenging. And then whatever we would agree on, that would be the second reading. The third reading was to concentrate on the most difficult areas of differences. And that would, it's hard to tell how long that process would be. But assuming we can find a situation that will allow face-to-face and ensure the health, the welfare of all the negotiators, then we can proceed. And hopefully we can proceed at a faster pace in the post-pandemic period so that we could meet, if not the schedule, at least close to the schedule that we originally had. So I think the prospects are still bright. It is an important process in which China is involved and in which all the parties get to know each other's perspective and hopefully come to an agreement that will be an effective and sustainable, you know, and something that can be readily implemented, code of conduct.
Yes, since I used to be the head of the joint working group on the consultations of the code of conduct, I know there is dynamics and political will on part of all the 11 parties to work out the COC at an early date. And it was agreed by 11 parties that we should try our best to work out to conclude such a COC by the end of the 2021. And I think that we have made good progress in the past few years. We have concluded the framework of the COC, and we have completed the first reading of the COC. Now we are in the process of the second reading of the COC. But of course, the process has been put into a break because of the pandemic in the last few months. And now all parties concerned are consulting each other, working together to speed up the process so that we can work out, we can form and conclude that COC at an early date. I think there is a strong political will to work out such a COC at an early date, and we need to work together for this end, to this end. And Philippines is a coordinator for China-ASEAN relations. And Philippines is also co-chair of the consultation of the COC. So we have been working very closely between our two countries on the COC consultations. And we look forward to the continued constructive role by Philippines in this process.
Ambassador, as we work to resolve this issue together, the South China Sea discussions has gone beyond our two countries as other parties have gotten involved as well. We took note that the US imposed restrictions on 24 People's Republic of China state-owned enterprises and executives for malign activities in the South China Sea. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said, "Our national interest is to ensure the completion of flagship projects under the Build, Build, Build program, and what the President said is clear. He will not follow the directives of the Americans because we are an independent country and we need investors from China." What are your thoughts and response on this?
Yes, recently, the US State Department and Commerce Department imposed sanctions on some Chinese companies and individuals. China is, of course, firmly opposed to this move. The participation of Chinese companies and individuals in a domestic construction activities is legitimate, lawful, and beyond reproach, lies entirely within its sovereignty. So the move by the US side, under the pretext of protecting the South China Sea, grossly interferes in China's internal affairs and aims to drive wedge between China and regional countries. We have taken note of the statement made by the presidential spokesperson, as you mentioned just now, Harry Roque, that President Duterte charted an independent foreign policy course that puts the national interest at the core. And the national interest of the Philippines is to ensure the completion of flagship projects under the Build program and need investors from China. We appreciate these statements since we feel that the primary task of the Philippine government is to promote economic recovery and people's well-being. The pursuit of an independent foreign policy is in line with the fundamental interest of the Philippine people and this country. The pragmatic cooperation between China and the Philippines has always been based on mutual respect, mutual benefit, and win-win results. And all projects are all conducted in compliance with the laws and regulations of the two countries. So the in-depth synergizing of China's Belt and Roads Initiative and the Build program has achieved fruitful results and is bringing more and more benefits to the people of our two countries. Chinese companies have made very major important contributions in this endeavor. So I believe that any attempt to undermine the normal economic cooperation between China and the Philippines will never succeed.
Thank you for your statement on that, Ambassador Huang. There is another issue that we wanted to talk about now. Another problem that we are facing right now, since 2016, personal exchanges between the two countries have entered into a climax. But this has also brought about the aforementioned problem, which is online gambling. Now, according to incomplete statistics, hundreds of thousands of Chinese citizens are engaged in the gambling industry in the Philippines. Now, we would like to ask for your opinion about this problem, and what do you think is the kind of cooperation the two countries will adopt to resolve this issue? And finally, will the embassy also take measures to restrict gambling practitioners in the Philippines?
The issue of online gambling in the Philippines is a complicated issue because it is, on the one hand, there are benefits. I mean, the clear reason why it's allowed in the Philippines has to do with the economic benefits. It bring a lot of the COVID funds also came from the funds or the taxes, but there also was the negative side. There were crimes related, offshoot of online gambling, kidnappings, and such cases. Now, I think on this issue, what we would like to do is really where we have a cooperation with China, although we have a different perspective. I mean, in China, online gambling is not allowed at all. In the Philippines, there are forms of gambling that are not allowed. Betting and other forms of gambling. But online gambling is regulated. It's subject to regulation. So I think the problem here has to do with, one, it's how to maintain the benefits that the government is deriving, or that the country is deriving from it, from taxes and revenue and the like, employment and the like, but to crack down on the negative side. There have been cases of people, I mean, they took advantage of the promotion of tourism to be able to go on group tours, and you are generally not allowed to convert your visas. So there is one loophole that we're trying to resolve right now, and that is that work visas should be strictly monitored so that there is a move to crack down on those without legal work visas and send them back to China. Uh, Second has to do with all the criminal cases. Here we need cooperation, and there is cooperation ongoing between the law enforcement authorities in China and in the Philippines. Some of the cooperation, of course, is done quietly because a lot of it has to do with surveillance, with, particularly involving kidnapping, where there are cases where, you know, the kidnapped victims are prominent or rich Chinese who come from the mainland are invited to come to the Philippines, and upon arrival or thereafter, a few days after, somehow there is a syndicate, and some of these syndicates involves not only Filipinos but also Chinese. So that's why you need this cooperation to crack down on this, and they have succeeded in a number of cases. Actually, some of them involving that you pay the ransom in bank accounts in China. So certainly it calls for cooperation in terms of tracing where this is going on and how this is being done. So this is a very controversial issue, aside from the whole issue of tax regulation, to make sure that they're properly taxed in accordance with the law. So a lot of it, where Philippine laws have to be implemented strictly, I think they should be implemented strictly, no matter who is affected. And if some Chinese have broken the law and have to be sent back to China, so be it. I think on that point, I think there is agreement on both sides. Eventually, I hope this matter can be resolved amicably, because for China, for Chinese officials have actually been talking to me and other diplomats and other Philippine officials about how it is a drain on their foreign exchange reserves, because the money is coming from here. Some of not through legal means, but through illegal banking channels, or what you call informal banking channel. So there is a drain here that China is experiencing. But most of all in China, they're complaining about the impact on the youth. In China, by the way, if you just go online, it's not very easy to find the online gambling. It's a very sophisticated way. They first attract you. They send you through your phones. It's like advertisement to join a numbers game, lottery, whatever. And you get drawn in, and then there's a deeper level that you have to pay in order to enter, and so on. So it leads to internet addiction, and that is one of the complaints of the Chinese, of the youth. So both economic challenges, economic and financial, as well as psychological. From the point of view of the Philippines, the key effort is really to crack down on the illegal elements, the illegal aspect of this, of what is allowed in the Philippines but has to be tightly regulated.
Ambassador, as you very eloquently shared, online gambling is a legal business activity in the Philippines, but it is illegal in China. One could say that this may be an important reason why a large number of Chinese people come to the Philippines so that they can engage in the gambling industry. But this has also brought some unstable factors to the Philippine society. Aside from the monitoring of work visas, what measures will the Philippine government take to regulate these activities further? And what will be China's involvement on this matter?
There is now regular meetings going on between the PNP, the local and the law enforcement agency in the Philippines, and the Chinese, the Ministry of Public Security, on how to strengthen. In the beginning, the meetings were focused on anti-drug campaign. And in recent meetings, they have also added in the agenda cooperation on the crimes related to the gambling that's happening in the Philippines, the online gambling, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, on the issue of kidnapping and the issue of Chinese who were deceived. They were brought there to it's almost like cases of trafficking, because they were, the way it's explained to me is that here in China, there is, it goes around on the chat groups, they want to find a job in a tropical paradise, high income, high tech. And so just submit your name to this, call this number. and then they're told to join a tour group. It's all paid for, and so it's very attractive. But when they arrive, they didn't expect it to be online gambling, and that their passports are confiscated. They don't have access to it. As I understand from colleagues in Manila and even from the Chinese embassy, I mean, a lot of these people, they go to the embassy to complain, and so it's a big problem, and I can see why, because they were in a sense hoodwinked, by all this. Now, I think this is where the cooperation would be, because the PNP, as I understand, has now set up a special operation or special desk on this, complete with the help of Chinese-speaking interpreters. Because the key problem in the Philippines is they want to crack down, the kidnapping syndicates on the human trafficking aspect of it. But if the person is not so knowledgeable in English, they have a hard time in documenting the case. Or in the case of one particular victim of kidnapping, he just wanted to get out of the country and didn't want to talk to the police. But later on, through cooperation on both sides, they were able to get his testimony here in China. As a matter of fact, we tried to facilitate this work. So there are areas of cooperation that we're doing. And some of it has been publicized. Quite a number of it is, of course, being done quietly, but there is active cooperation outside. I should also tell you that in China, there is actually a whole movement right now. It's like it got interrupted by COVID, but even just before COVID, they were in the middle of this. It's part of an anti-crime campaign. And part of it was those who came back from online gambling work in the Philippines. When they came back to China, their passports were confiscated or canceled, because when they left, they said they were just going to tour and they would come back, on a temporary visit. So there is now a crackdown on this part, and then a crackdown on the Philippine part, on the criminal aspect of it. So hopefully, there will be a tightening of the news, and that would lessen the negative aspect of this as the government itself evaluates, whether it's worth it or not. Because as you know, in recent months, the tightening of the rules on taxation has resulted in one or two or a couple of major online gambling operations to also fold up, either pay up or fold up. So I expect there will be this effort. As I said, the basic approach is, while there are economic gains from it, it's how to crack down on the negative aspect of it, And if they're not willing to pay their taxes, if they're not willing to have a regular work visa, and if they're not willing to register their employees in a legal way, then, there will come a time that you'll have to deport a number of these. And it's happening already. It's happening already.
Yes, we talk about online gambling in the Philippines. You know that after the online gambling was legalized in 2016 in this country, many Chinese nationals have been flexing in to this country to join the gambling. And it caused a lot of social and legal problems in China. Gambling is totally illegal in China, and online gambling is even more harmful to those families who are involved. So we have been cracking down on gambling in China, and we do not allow Chinese nationals to engage in overseas gambling in any country in this world. So we do not allow our nationals to engage in gambling services. We do not Chinese investors to engage in gambling industry services, and we don't allow any overseas gambling industry to target at especially Chinese citizens. And of course, we have some different perspective about online gambling with your country. And we have been communicating in a very mutual respect way. And we are actually working very closely to crack down on illegal online gambling in this country, because those illegal online gambling also have caused a lot of problems in your country, including a lot of crimes related to gambling. And that kind of crimes have not only, do harm to your country, but also has caused a lot of negative impacts on Chinese image overseas. Just a small handful of people who are engaging in that kind of online gambling, but they are doing a lot of harm to both of us. But of course, we know that the online gambling are bringing some economic benefits to your country. But at the same time, we hope you will realize that for a long run, you will bring even more social and economic negative impact to your country. And so we look forward to even closer cooperation with the country in cracking down illegal online gambling, in cracking down the crimes related to gambling in a country. And I think it would be also helpful to revitalize the tourism cooperation between our two countries. In the last year alone, the visitors from China to your country stood at more than 1.7 million people. It is a big number, and it is still increasing, of course, because of the COVID-19. It's been badly, impacted. But we believe there is a great potential for tourism cooperation in the future. And we have to make sure that kind of healthy development of tourism cooperation between our two countries.
Ambassador, you mentioned that online gambling is harmful and expounded on crimes involving Chinese gambling practitioners in the Philippines, such as kidnapping and murder. Clearly, this has affected the image of the local Chinese to a certain extent. Could you kindly expound on the measures that the embassy will take to solve this problem?
As I said just earlier, that the embassy has been working very closely with our counterparts from different agencies in this country to tackle the issue, to make sure that illegal gambling will be cracked down in a proper way, and the legitimate rights of Chinese nationals will be protected according to law. And we look forward to continue cooperation from your government in cracking down on those illegal gamblings. And we hope someday in the future there will be less and less Chinese people who are engaged in illegal gamblings and any gamblings, because it is not legal according to the Chinese law. And as Chinese nationals, at the end of the day, they have to abide by the Chinese laws.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now, in all these issues, it's always, like you said earlier, people's war and cooperation between two countries, both countries rather, is very paramount. Now, to end, we would like to ask, what is your outlook for the future of Sino-Philippine relations?
Well, actually, in the end, it will depend on the people-to-people contacts. And that's why the foundation of the bilateral relations will really depend on spreading the benefits to the people, whether in economic, in trade, in terms of investment, in terms of projects, that the people feel the benefit and that they will support, the continuation of these relations, so that it will not depend on who is the leader now or the leader later, but that there is a solid foundation. Of course, it helps to have communication and to have good media reporting, because part of it really is it's how it's framed in media reports and how it's reported. It influences public opinion, because in the end, it's a battle for the hearts and minds of the people. But the bilateral contacts go a long way. We have a long historic foundation that goes back hundreds of years, almost a millennium back. But in terms of the current challenge, it's really a battle for the minds and hearts of both the Filipino people and the Chinese people here. Yeah. And I think the future will depend a lot on the strength of the people's support and public opinion.
This year we are celebrating the 45th anniversary of diplomatic relations between our two countries. Actually, the relationship between our two countries are centuries old, if not millenniums old. So we have been very friendly neighbors since centuries, and it is the mainstream, the cooperation is the mainstream between our two countries. So in the past 45 years, we have achieved a lot remarkably in the political, economic, and social fields. And this kind of progress has made encouraging contribution to the developments of our respective countries and to the overall relationship of our two countries. So we believe that this relationship still has a great potential in the future to develop. And in the new era, we are facing a lot of common challenges. And we are also facing the main task of developing our national economies and improving the livelihood of our peoples. So we need to work together as neighbors to further deepen and further strengthen our relationship. At the end of the day, as neighbors, we will be always together. We will never be drifting apart from each other. So we believe that we need to live in peace and in harmony with each other and work constructively to deepen our pragmatic cooperation. And I also believe that it's extremely important to strengthen the people-to-people exchanges, since we know understanding will promote trust, and only having trust that we can in turn contribute to the further development of our relations. So I'm optimistic about the future development of our two countries, and it will bring the progress, the development of our two countries' relationship will benefit to the people of our two countries.
Thank you for that, Ambassador. And we really do hope that the Sino-Philippine relations will blossom, and that the hearts and minds of the Filipino people will really work more towards that goal. Our deepest gratitude to His Excellency Ambassador Chito Santa Romana and His Excellency Ambassador Huang Xilian. My name is Isa Chong.
And my name is Michael Valera. Catch us online on Facebook, Q105.1, and on Twitter and Instagram, QRadio105 for more interviews. You can also stream us on QRadio105.com.